I can tell you from the inside of an orchestra, being a classical musician for more than 40 years, new music has a pretty bad reputation among classical music audiences. Our audiences are known to either get up and sit it out in the lobby when the new music is mixed in with a program, or simply just not buy a ticket. So in the aftermath of the 20th century's artistic upheavals that we're all familiar with, serious composition faces a critical question. How can music today reclaim its higher purpose to move the soul, elevate the spirit, and orient us towards the good? Building on the ideas in this statement of principles for contemporary classical music, I am joined by these two wonderful young composers, Henry Wolf Carradine and Stephen Limbaugh, and we're going to have a conversation about tradition, renewal, and the future of serious music. And I just wanted to give us a quote from Roger Scruton. Roger tells us styles may change, deals may come and go, but the broad demands of aesthetic judgment are permanent. And I'd just like to tell you a little something about these two wonderful composers that we're with today. Stephen Limbaugh III is a composer and concert pianist. Stephen's compositions have been recorded by the Russian Philharmonic Orchestra and Velatina Lisitsa. His debut album, Pants, was the top-selling album of contemporary concert music on the Billboard classical charts in 2014. As a solo pianist, his engagements include the Golden Globes, Emmys, the White House. Limbaugh parlayed his success as a performer and composer into writing the musical scores for films, the latest of which, The Beldam, stars Patricia Heaton. He's currently composing a symphony for the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence while chronicling the process live on X platform. That is, it's accrued over 2 million views so far. Very impressive. And also with us is Henry Wolf Carradine. He's a composer and musician whose work blends the tradition of Western classical music with techniques that extend its expressive possibilities, all within a tonal and culturally grounded framework. He was born in Los Angeles and shaped by years of study in Vienna, and he's developed a voice that bridges past and present with clarity and depth. His music seeks to move listeners through structure, meaning, and emotional resonance, rejecting superficial effects and noise for their own sake. Carradine's work spans concert music, theater, and media, and he's also founder of the Musica Universalis, a popular YouTube channel dedicated to music education and appreciation. This is a YouTube channel that I already enjoy very much. It's one of my go-tos. So, welcome, gentlemen. It's very nice to have you, and we can to talk about classical music and its future as in the composition. Why don't you tell me a little bit more personally about what pulled you into composition and what's the thing that drives you personally about composing and this it's a hard sell these days, and a composer is very much alone in the wilderness trying to get their music performed and appreciated. And maybe we can start with you, Stephen.
Sure. So part of it is necessity. Uh, I was a trumpet performance major at the University of Missouri Kansas City Conservatory. And one thing you learn as an undergraduate that earning a symphony job eventually is a superhuman feat that, not all of us players are superhumans like Andy Balio. And so it is I would say the necessity was, if earning a living at music had to be a goal, then I needed to figure out ways to do that. So I was attracted to composition already anyway. And then so it just turned out that I enjoyed it so much that I should switch majors to do that. Quit the conservatory, went to Los Angeles to join a rock band for a little bit, and then got on YouTube with original music, wrote an album, like you mentioned, of original classical piano music that incorporated what I would call sort of contemporary folk music. Even though it's not folk music, I'm saying I'm borrowing on what our new folk music is of today, which would be pop music, film music, and those sorts of tropes, but then elevating them into a more developed and crafted aesthetic.
Mm.
And so I feel like there's a long, strong tradition of this practice in classical music. Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto, the third movement is a folk tune, a Ukrainian folk tune, for example. We all know that, or even in a piece like The Rite of Spring, the opening bassoon solo is, I think, some other sort of Slavic folk tune. Anyway, composers have been doing this the whole time, essentially. And I feel like that part of the uh, thing that we've lost in contemporary classical music is that composers today don't live in the world that as it exists right now. They either try to repeat the tropes of the past and don't do it as well, or they completely reject everything and then make something that's totally incomprehensible to a contemporary audience right now. Anyway, so I had success with that. People responded to it very, very positively, and to pay the bills, so to speak, that I was able to, like the bio said, parlay that into doing film music and commercial music. I mean, I've done music for cell phone commercials, but you got to make a living. I also, I mean, even Salvador Dali did illustrations for magazines once like there's no, it's not selling out, so to speak, because at the end of the day, food has to go on the table. You have to live in this world as it is. And also it can be fun and you can learn things. So that's a brief history of my background, what drew me to it. I could say, necessity, whether cultural, monetary, or just personal expression and enjoyment.
Didn't Hindemith write the theme music to Felix the Cat cartoon?
Did he really? I didn't know that. If he
I
did,
think, yeah, I know he when he first came to the U.S. Okay, anyway, so Henry, I don't want to digress, but Henry, tell us about your path into music and what drives you. What is your calling as a composer? It's a very unusual and rare calling in this day and age.
Yeah, very, very not advisable, probably, for a rational human being. Um, yeah, first of all, thanks, Fisher, for including me in this discussion. I look forward to talking with you, Andy, and Stephen about the future of composition. This is very exciting for me. For me, it started when I actually, as a 90s child, a child of the 90s, I grew up on like Spielberg movies. And a parlor trick my brother would have me do when I was like 7 years old would be like, he'd say, sing the theme to, Jurassic Park or Superman or Star Wars or something like that. It's not that impressive, but he was impressed by it, that I could like memorize John Williams motifs. So I got into music because my parents started me on like piano lessons. And I always loved like John Williams scores, and then like Lord of the Rings came out. There was like this brief moment in the 90s and early 2000s where film music reached like a new zenith, and then that kind of like died off again, in my opinion. And that really attracted me to composition, and through that, I got into like the classics. It didn't start for me necessarily, even though my father would play like Rachmaninoff records all the time, and my great-great-grandmother was a famous opera singer like a century ago, and she knew people like Mahler and Strauss.
Really? Oh
But
my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah, she was. She premiered Electra, for example, at the Semper Opera. She's forgotten now, but she was very famous at the time. Her name was Ernestina Schumann-Heink. And
Wow.
so I got a little bit of that, but the truth is my interest comes through John Williams in composition. And then because I wanted to compose, I started learning about composition. And then about like when I was 15 years old, I discovered, wait, at universities and like conservatories, they don't teach you how to compose like John Williams. They teach you this stuff called like 12-tone music and serialism. And that was, for me, like a shock, because when you're exposed to that at 15, the visceral reaction is, well, this is really ugly and awful. I don't get this at all. And they always tell you, keep listening to it, you'll get into it. And you do warm to some things, but I never completely warmed to it. And so I always figured I just got deeper into like what is tonality in composition. And I eventually moved to Vienna because I was just not satisfied with what I was learning in theory in the US. And when I moved to Vienna, I also wasn't initially satisfied, but I found a private teacher who I studied with for 4 years who showed me things that I frankly couldn't have imagined that made such a difference in how I compose, and sort of established my grounding and the importance of actually how difficult tonal music is to write, and how much discipline you need, and et cetera. And it's not like this kitschy, naive thing. So to keep it short, I just want composition to get back to a place where it was without being like pastiche. And that's my driving force, is to try and find a voice that's new, but there's a memory there of what came before.
That's beautifully stated, and it's very nice for me. I mean, I'm of a different generation than you two, and it's very fascinating for me to encounter two members of your generation who actually came into great music through the movies. And we've been saying that it was my generation. We were saying that Bugs Bunny was keeping people connected to Rossini and Wagner and whatnot, famously so, and holding on by a thread through through the cartoons. But um, it's so. You remind me of one of the things I like to say, which is great composing never died; it just moved to Hollywood. And this this preeminent art form, filmmaking, has embedded in it all the sounds that all three of us are talking about today. We're talking about tonal music, where the music is correlated to normal human emotions, and that's things that are going on in a movie, and the director with the composers trying to pull you through this story and make you feel certain things for about the story. And there's a certain law of physics that are perhaps embedded in nature that um, that music has already encoded in it, and that and so there's a Roger Scruton talked a lot about that. He was able to show that in his book Understanding Music. He very beautifully shows how certain types of lines have a an intuitive sense about them that would make you feel a certain way. And he actually goes there. He actually goes to the place where I don't hardly any other writers were willing to go, because talking about the way music sounds, ladies and gentlemen, is the hardest thing I can imagine. This is such a tough conversation. You notice that we're not playing sound files. We're not resorting to just play, listen, having our audience actually listen to music right now, because we're talking about music, and it's a tough one. So yeah, it's so maybe tell me some more about your what you what you're seeing in terms of where all the talent of composition is finding ways to express themselves these days, and what has happened to what we're calling serious music and serious new music.
I think a lot of young composers are talked out of doing anything that they would call derivative. Derivativeness is used as a pejorative now in the modern conservatory.
Meaning derived from something that already happened before.
Precisely.
Yeah, so you have this cult of originality. Whatever you do, it's got to be something that nobody did before. That's a very heavy burden. And I don't think other composers didn't feel like that was not their burden. They were constantly picking through. Well, Bach, let's start with Bach, was constantly looking at Vivaldi and all these other Marcello and all these other composers, and borrowing and restructuring it. And it was just business, and
Well, early Beethoven. Yeah, sorry. Early Beethoven sounds very similar to Mozart, and Haydn was
right.
one of his teachers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've read in some like biographies, they call it his Mozartian period, where he wrote like Mozart, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, we know the pieces, so we know it's Beethoven now, but I don't think anybody in Vienna was sitting there like this and going, Mozart did this 5 years ago. You know, that's, you
Well,
know,
who did Mozart write like?
yeah.
Yeah, Mozart was writing music that's highly derivative of other composers, particularly his father, and whatnot. And then
Christian Bach, for example. Johann
yeah,
Christian
right.
Bach. Yeah.
Yeah, and Beethoven, and then you look at all these other composers, they're all looking backwards, and or at least certainly looking over the shoulders of other composers. And as much as Tchaikovsky was admonishing and Wagner, and then suddenly he went through this Wagnerian period. So it's you know, yeah, yeah, it's this endless composition is nothing but borrowing and deriving.
And most of human existence is borrowing and deriving and building upon something that existed previously. I mean, imagine throwing out all the rules of engineering and trying to build a building. And
Right.
Yeah,
not.
that's right. Yeah. It's like Watt inventing the steam engine, and he says, "Oh, you know, coal and fire and all of these things are anachronisms. So I'm going to
Well,
do
they already
something
did that.
completely new."
Uh,
Yeah, we already did fire.
we already
Yeah,
burned that before.
yeah,
Got burn something new.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Ah, okay. Well, I want to you've done you and some other composers. You've done something that was it has a precedence, but it is audacious, where you actually put pen to paper and you laid down a statement of principles, which are to my reading things that many of us have been feeling for some generations, but you managed to distill the way so many of us have been feeling and thinking about about music composition. Particularly since since World War II. Where many of us in the business feel like we lost our way, and it's a really it's a beautiful document, and I think it's something that we would all benefit from keeping next to us. And I'd like to read this for our audience. You and your colleagues wrote, "We believe there is a metaphysical aspect in music that cannot be fully described using language." Next point: noise, ambience, and music are categorically different sonic phenomenon. The test for this is not how it is theorized, but how it sounds. And you go on. There are hierarchies in music, not the least of which is that of pitch relations. The incorporation and good use of established musical hierarchies is essential to achieving the higher purposes of classical music. A composition is meritorious if it meets the higher ends of classical music. This is most effectively achieved when inspiration is fused with a technical command of a compositional craft that is rooted in musical hierarchies. Program notes or pre-concert comments can help orient the audience towards a certain interpretation, but they do not make bad music meritorious. I got a great story for you on this one. Classical music is not strung together series of special effects. Extended instrumental techniques should be used judiciously in support of the core content of a composition. New classical music cannot be uninspired restatements of past music. There should be some unique perspective or novelty, even if it borrows from past traditions, to be meritorious. A classical music score is not a museum art piece. Undue merit should not be assigned to a composition because the score's visual complexity, right? So complexity equals deep fallacy. We see that a lot in art. Simple is not the enemy of the good. Classical music can be simple, but never simple-minded. Complex is not the enemy of the good insofar as it is not complex for the sake of complexity. Complexity should serve a musical purpose. A composition can provoke deep contemplation by challenging an audience, but if it alienates the audience, it cannot achieve the higher purposes of music. Unlike other genres of music, the purpose of classical music is more than the mere amusement of the audience. The market value and popularity with audiences of a composition does not alone invalidate it from being classical music. The ideal manner in which recording technology is used to capture new compositions or in the compositional process, sampling, musique concrète, etc., is to attain a result that preserves the higher purposes of classical music. We do not exclude sources of inspiration from indigenous music, folk, non-Western traditions, electronic music, or popular. Their good faith appropriation into classical music is the prerogative of all composers who wish to do so. No genre of music is the sole property of any one culture, race, or creed. Compositions should be judged on their merit, not by the race, creed, or sex of the composer, and that which really speaks to the recent political upheavals in classical music. And this so your this work that you're doing is not unprecedented. There was a group of famous Russian composers who called them the Mighty Handful of Five. We had Balakirov, Caesar Cui, Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, and Alexander Borodin. They were working together to try to form a national identity for Russia, which was still Russia was still a bit of a backwater back then, and they wanted to define their culture within the European sphere. So anyhow, it's remarkable that you had the guts to put things down like that. Has your courageous and audacious gesture, has it been well received?
I would say largely well, including, I think, the reason we've even gotten together to do this at the Roger Scruton Legacy Foundation is because I think that a lot of people who are interested in the arts, like Sir Roger, probably enjoy seeing this from people who are actually in the business, that are looking around and recognizing, and we're not, if it loses us jobs, that's fine, but somebody's got to take a stand about what's been going on. And hopefully, but I know it will, and it has, it inspires other people to join in on this. And also it's a statement of principles. It's like, look, if you don't want to do this, if you're a postmodern noise composer and you don't want to do it, that's your prerogative. We're telling you that this is what we're going to do in 2025. We're going to make music essentially adhering to these principles. And I suspect that it will be extremely well received by audiences, and you can't stop us.
Right, and nor can we stop anyone else from writing to their heart. But it's it's good. And Henry, what has there been any feedback on the other side of the pond?
Not a lot actually in Europe, because I think things are moving in some countries in a better direction. Like I think the US, I've seen some good stuff happening in France and Italy. Also in like the Slavic countries, there's like, I think, what is it, like Nordic minimalism? I don't want to call it the wrong thing, but I've seen like a departure from the sort of high avant-garde 60s music.
Well, Per Norgard just passed away about 10 days ago. Has anyone, he's a big name. I recorded 6 of his symphonies with the Oslo Philharmonic, so he's a big deal, but hardly anybody has heard of him. Would you agree with that, or was I just not paying attention?
No, I'd agree with that, because until you mentioned him, I hadn't heard of him. So
yeah. Okay. Well,
I'll admit it. I mean, I hadn't heard of him.
He's a big deal in Denmark. Let me put it that way. So he is that Nordic avant-garde, highly abstract, non-melodic. The guy can write music, but it's just really out there. And
I can't list like I just noticed that there was like in the Nordic countries, there was this thing I heard about called Nordic minimalism a few years back, which I saw as a sort of somewhat positive direction for music to take. Not necessarily something I would aspire to write myself, but the issue is, I think Austria especially, Mahler I think it was Mahler had the joke that if the world comes to an end, he'd move to Vienna, because everything happens 50 years later in Vienna. And so they adopt everything much later. And I just think for the past, like, so this is really like, I've stewed in this environment of like, you have to write this way, that people were writing like in the late 60s. and I've just sort of stewed. And it's like a pressure cooker, and it's gotten to the point where I've just had it, and I know that most audiences, especially younger audiences, like this like 1960s love generation boomers, I think a lot of the academic class are still really into it, but you know, a new generation is coming in now, and I think a lot of them just they're not interested in that type of composition. So I'm noticing it's a little bit, I'd say, staggered here, but I don't expect it to stay that way. But I think there's more movement in other countries that aren't so like set in their ways.
So you're in Vienna right now. Is it still, is it 1975 there right now?
I'd say they're moving more, I hear like more hints of tonalism in some of the new music here, but
Okay.
to me it sounds more like expressionism. Like they've, instead of going back to like full tonal, they're going to late like late 30s expressionists. So
Okay.
sort of like Weimar Republic type music is how I'd describe it. Sort of um,
Alban
I'm
Berg,
blanking. Yeah,
like
yeah,
Alban.
more like that. More like that. Yeah, less avant-garde, but you still. I mean, like 15 years ago, when I was still studying music, there was stuff like a guy who his composition was him with sandpaper scratching a log in the woods. Um, and that was his composition, and he earned a master's of composition. So in Vienna, one of the prestigious schools. So
Well,
you know, that's the,
Leif Segerstrom recently passed away. He was a composer, conductor. He wrote some 350 um, symphonies. Are you aware of these 350 symphonies of
no.
per of Leif Segerstrom? But they're all about 6 minutes long.
Okay.
They're kind
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
I think of,
absurd,
yeah.
but
I
yeah,
think I have seen this a while
right.
back. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so once again, I've mentioned someone that even composers have not heard of, but these are people with, really big careers. This week we all, recently there was a premiere at the Hamburg State Opera of Unsuk Chin's new opera, and already critics came out of the gates quite critical of it. Even Van Magazine, which is usually all in on anything avant-garde, was pretty hard on this, and it was an extraordinarily expensive um, opera production. It was around $3 million, and it went way over budget and way over. It actually was much longer than it was meant to be. So we have this is going to be a musical event. Unsuk Chin has written very moving music before, but this one is going to draw a lot of attention and ire, and is going to be held up as an example of what some people are going to say shouldn't happen. Are you aware of this new opera that just came out?
Not another one that I don't know. I knew the Nordic guy. I'm familiar with like his third symphony, but I don't know this one. It's sometimes hard to even find, even if you want to go track these things down. It's sometimes hard to find, especially opera. Just
Okay.
searching around YouTube, it's hard to find. You can, and the scores are like $700 if you just want a pocket score of the new music. I mean, it's hard to track down and even see what's out there. Sometimes there's in addition to just a coherence issue with a lot of the new music, is that there's also certainly a massive marketing issue. They get $3 million and then they can't even have the foresight to pay the reviewers to give it glowing reviews.
Okay.
It's the Hollywood way.
Well,
I can be
Yeah.
ironic and ridiculous about it, but
yeah.
Well,
Right. Well,
I think I'm gonna.
every time this happens, it hurts me every time we have one of these scandals in new music. I think it sets new music, it sets the buying temperature lower and lower for commissioning new music, or for audiences to attend new operas or things like that. And my wish is that it would be incrementally more and more positive feelings about the new.
The thing about a lot of new compositions, to be just quite frank about it, from my point of view, is that I'd say like 95% of them, for in my case, whenever somebody says, here's this new composition or this new composer, I'm just in general disappointed. And that's why I don't know a lot of composers, like living composers that I like outside of film music that I really truly enjoy. There's a couple of there's like music from the 80s from John Adams that I particularly like. I think his more recent stuff has lost my sort of interest, but I think Nixon in China is a really like very interesting opera and a fun listen. I like his violin concerto. Like Philip Glass stuff is also fine. I can listen to that and enjoy it. Personally enjoy his Truman Show score and his Tyrolean piano concerto. But I like, and obviously like my interest is like Howard Shore and John Williams and those guys. Michael Giacchino, the new guy, he's very good too in film. So that's the kind of music that doesn't disappoint me. But when I go to like academic intellectual circles for this is what's getting performed in this like brand new concert house on the Elba or something like that, and then you listen to it, I'm like, really? Just pay a film composer to write like a fanfare that's good, you know? And
I've got a question about a composer that I always find interesting that is living and is kind of a rock star in the world. That in his music, I'm able to grasp onto a lot and I learn things from it, even though some of it's sort of strange, is Thomas Adis.
oh
Right.
yeah, he is
Right.
good. Yeah,
He's
yeah.
I would invite our listeners today to go on YouTube and listen to his violin concerto because you're going to hear, first of all, it's not particularly long, but you're going to hear the whole, you're going to hear um, what I would characterize the first two movements as a hard listen, and the last movement is a lot easier listen. Now, the last movement is strange music, but there's something going on within the last movement that allows that can hook the ear. And so, what I would invite our listeners is to ask yourselves, what is it that's hooking your ear, if anything, in the last movement, in contrast to the first two movements? And I know I'm really leading the witness here, but that's just these are my subjective feelings about it because I played that concerto with Thomas Adis many years ago, and he was conducting it. And I'm thinking like the first movement, like, what in the world was that? And the second one, oh my goodness, what, you know, I was just like, and then suddenly the last one was, oh, my ears perked up. Oh, okay. There's something going on here that I can, you know, it has a direction. It's pulling me. It feels back like it's what we call goal-based harmony. And you know, there's this, suddenly I felt my body was engaged again in it. So that's one comment I would have about him. I'm sure both of you are familiar with him. Did you want to speak about him as a very popular, or very successful for being performed? He is a conductor in his own right, and he comes from that Mahler, Mendelssohn model of being a conductor, being a composer who also conducts.
Yeah, he's very interesting to me because I think there's also, you know, we talk about these hierarchies. A lot of new music, for whatever reason, it's always written in this moderato tempo. And it's like there's like a gesture here or there that's maybe fast, you know, 30-second notes or something, but the whole thing is just moderato. Thomas Adis, which I think I said Adis, it's Adis.
I believe it's Adis.
There's an accent mark on the E or S or whatever. But
Right.
he writes music that's a nice allegro tempo that has a little bit more excitement and some motion to it. And that's exciting because I feel like a lot of composers sometimes forget that people are sitting in the audience and they're going to watch the musicians. And if everybody's just, you know, playing whole notes and just sort of weird textures or morphing in and out, there's not even anything to watch during the process, much less listen to it. And it has to unfold over these long time. I mean, I like his music a whole lot. There is one curious thing, and this might be a little technical for the discussion, but he does have a composing technique to where he'll write an incredibly complicated rhythm that to count this thing out, it's very difficult. And then he has above it the rhythm beat out in a more coherent looking way. And he goes, sounds like this though. And if I ever get to meet the guy, I want to ask him, why not just write it how it, I mean, it looks cool on the score, I guess. But why, if it just is supposed to sound like this, why not just write it that way in the first place? Anyway, there's funny things with him, but
doesn't he do the irregular time signature thing?
It's a lot of that.
Irrational. Sorry,
irrational. It's irrational, and then it's also like triplets within like within other triplets, and it's tough.
But let's not lose our audience. Not everybody speaks composition, so let's but yes, I hope to people at least we can reference that work. So I wanted to talk about something you had written in your statement of principles. Program notes or pre-concert comments can help orient the audience toward a certain interpretation, but they do not make bad music meritorious. So I tend to be more of a hardliner and absolutist about these things. That no talking. I don't want to. People do not go to a concert. I must tell you, I can sense that when we're about to start a concert and then someone comes out and talks instead of just playing some music, it drives the audience crazy. And I think there's been an epidemic of talking about trying to explain music, through didactic presentations, certainly since Leonard Bernstein in the 1960s, where he would come out and have to make a case for some music that the Manhattan audiences did not really want to hear. So he set the tone, and certainly Bernstein was a paragon of musical virtues in so many ways, including as a composer. He actually did write some really great music, and as much as he struggled and he was very tortured. I remember he was conducting Israel Philharmonic once, and we were doing Pulcinella. And he threw down his baton in the middle of Pulcinella. He said, "Why didn't I write that?" And because he was, he had this composer envy. And then another, when I played in Israel Phil for nearly a decade, and we were the canon Philharmonic. We were like a canon factory, meaning we only played canonical works. We played Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Bruckner, a little bit of Stravinsky. That was modern music for us, Rite of Spring or Firebird. But we were just playing crowd pleasers, and we had a ton of audience. We had a huge hall that was filled every night. And at a certain point, the orchestra committee went to Zubin Mehta and said, "Listen, come on, we got to do some new music. We have we have composers in Israel. They're living composers. Come on." So Zubin said, "Oh yes, of course, we'll do something." So there was this composer named Shidlovsky, and he wrote this piece called Absalom, and it was sort of derived from a story in the Bible. So we have a title from the Old Testament, so to sort of lead the audience, to already give a context. So already this is a modernism when you name something, you give something a name so to sort of set up the listener's minds, like Don Juan of Richard Strauss, tells about a Don Juan, or the idea of Don Juan. And anyway, so this composer, this piece was rough. It was just bleak, and Zubin realized we better explain it to the audience. Like say something. So he invites the composer to start talking, and the composer gets up there, and first of all, he had even in Hebrew he spoke like Elmer Fudd, and and already that was pretty funny. And then he started talking for 20 minutes. And the audience was telling him to sit down and be quiet. Israeli audiences, they're very, self-expressed, and they're saying enough, must speak enough. And he said, no, wait. So he starts getting into this battle where and I've seen this has happened in other orchestras where you have a composer up there being told to sit down, and they still insist on talking some more. And the second night, Zubin invited him to come up and speak, and he said, "I would like to invite our composer to say a few brief comments about his work. And of course, he digressed again, and it just really went overboard. So, can you expound on that? That you weren't being such a hardliner as I may have been in this regard. Is it okay to explain music before it's even been played?
I generally don't like doing it for my own pieces. Um, I feel like whatever my explanation is not going to live up to whatever people imagine themselves. That's just my opinion. Obviously, you have programmatic music where that's totally understandable to explain, even like Vivaldi's Four Seasons, he has little short poems for each movement. And if you put that in the program, it's actually very helpful as a listener to understand, oh, I'm supposed to be hearing a fly buzzing in this part of summer, something like that. But you know, the issue with for example, I'll give an example where I was kind of like disappointed is I read about Beethoven's Tempest Sonata. For me, the third movement of that piano sonata always sounded like waves or the ocean or something very like water-like. And then I read about him, he wrote it while watching horses trot by his window outside. And that just doesn't sound like the piece to me. To me, it's like on the ocean, and it's you're sailing or something, like maybe a little bit in gusty weather or something like that, but not just horses clopping by your window, you know. So
Uh,
I think if you tell what actually was the influence of a piece, it can sometimes be a disappointment to listeners.
Yeah, I just I can't imagine having to stand up in front of a concert hall and give a defense of my music before they even hear it. That means I probably haven't written something that I shouldn't have to do that. I mean, that's my answer. If I'm doing my job as a composer, the music should speak for itself.
right. Okay. Interesting. So it's yeah, music. One of your principles is the music kind of has to stand on its own legs without all these other things going on. I mean,
Or maybe
certainly.
just a sentence, just a sentence of what like seen by the stream in the Sixth Symphony of Beethoven, which we heard before
Okay.
this webinar started. It's just one sentence, but everything is there that needs to be there for the listener to imagine a stream. It's their own stream, that maybe where they take walks, they imagine their stream, that sort of a thing. I like that sort of very open-ended explanation of a piece.
Hmm.
And may I piggyback on that real quick, because I think it's also important
Please.
that you want the audience to supply their own like the drama of the music is happening inside the audience, inside their hearts. This is like a principle of Aristotle and poetics. Whenever there's a play going on, the drama isn't happening on stage, it's happening in the audience, in the individuals. And if you give them way too much information and this whole backstory about it, you don't allow the audience to bring themselves to the music. And I think that's super important because they will take their life experiences and their feelings and impress upon those on what they're listening to. Don't rob them of that, because that's the power of a composer, is to be able to allow people to do that.
Even like the Rite of Spring, for example, which is about like sacrifice and very like deep things and brutal things. But I was at a concert of the Rite of Spring at the Hollywood Bowl many years ago, and the conductor, I forget who it was, he sort of like disparagingly said, "Well, this is what this piece is actually about. It's not about dinosaurs," because that's what they used in Disney's Fantasia. It's animated with dinosaurs. But
Right.
I thought that doesn't detract from the music.
No.
If somebody sees dinosaurs, that's fine too. And it works, in my opinion. It works for evolution up to, dinosaurs. It can work for that too.
Well, yeah. When they call classical music a dinosaur, I always say, "Well, kids love dinosaurs." So, I wanted to talk about. I think there's an important um, question is how do we define classical music? What is, I mean, small c, not as in classical period, but What is classical music and what makes it so? Please.
Yeah, that's one thing that we really wanted to zero in on in the statement of principles. You went through the bullet points, but um, I believe that classical music has a very narrow definition. It's not all music it's not all music that just happens to be performed at a place like Carnegie Hall.
Or,
It's
or by an orchestra or by a string quartet or
Yes, that's right. Like the Thong Song has a string quartet in it. The Thong Song by Cisco is not classical music, right? Like it's not just. I mean, the instrumentation is critical, but it's what you're doing with the instrumentation. And so, what our statement of principles opens up with is that the classical music has a higher objective, and that's to provoke deep contemplation in the listener. I mean, yes, there's also going to be a hedonic response to, like, they clap or they feel emotions during it, but in the provoking of deep contemplation, the audience is carrying something more with them that they can't use that they can't necessarily describe with verbal language.
okay.
They carry with them everything that could be, considers like purpose, to metaphysical things like connection to God, purpose in life, reflection on the past. All of these things happen. A lot of music that is not all music that I'll rephrase. A lot of music that is not classical music can't get there. All it does is provoke a hedonic response. You hear an EDM song, you
Yeah.
bop to a beat, and
Right.
I mean, that's all it is capable of doing.
Would you say that one of the characteristics of what makes music classical is that it develops elements, a compositional element, either a rhythm or a melody?
Yes, there is a journey, and in fact, classical forms are centered around those sorts of journeys. A theme is established in an exposition, for example, and then there's literally, in the sonata form, there's literally a section called the development section.
Yeah, yes, but I mean, but just broadly, without having a development section, is it this broader idea of development is one of the things that makes classical music classical, is that you like the journey that you say. Yeah, go ahead, Henry, because I'm sure you've been thinking about
Well,
this.
it evokes obviously a lot more in the listener. So, while, for example, where I am in the world, you have like Holzhacker music, which is like regional folk music, like yodeling and horns and stuff like
Oh,
that,
okay.
or brass music, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's
And you
these.
wouldn't also
I like the
or
TV.
polkas.
They have these beer drinking shows in Bavaria and Austria. You just turn on TV and you're watching this big beer hall, and they have a polka band and singers, and you're joining in. You have your beer at home and watching TV, right?
And people here kind of just like a lot of people here don't, especially in like metropolitan areas, they don't like it, But if you get
Well,
out
it's
in the
like
countryside,
when I was
it's
growing up, it
good.
was hee haw. We had hee haw for the country folk, and it was
Yeah.
a great show. It was a guilty
But
pleasure for city slickers.
we wouldn't consider, for example, that classic. We wouldn't consider that classical music, for example. However,
Okay.
if you listen to something like Richard Strauss's Alpen Symphony, he has
Yeah.
he has moments where he evokes that kind of music with horns or whatnot,
Yeah.
or um, and he's putting it into a grand narrative, for example. And he's taking things from the vernacular culture and he's putting them into something grander.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's impossible to even do that with modern types of things. Like I said, where was the like avant-garde 60s let's say not avant-garde, but there was no like tonal 60s composers, serious composers. I'm not talking about like your George Martin or your Van Dyke Parks that like supported the bands back then. But like for the Beach Boys had a composer and the Beatles had a composer behind them. Not those type of people. There wasn't like a serious composer that was like, why don't I make a scherzo movement that's like a twist,
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like there's something you can take. I think it's totally fine to take from, modern
Existing
sources,
culture.
yeah, but it has to be woven into something grander that's not just that one like little thing. Like if you listen to a Chopin piece, for example, Chopin will especially his concertos, not his like one name pieces that's like it's a polonaise or it's a
Yeah.
waltz. If you listen to his like concertos, for example, or longer form pieces or sonatas, there will be moments of a polonaise or a mazurka or like little dances from Poland, which if you go to like a Polish town and hear that music out of context, it's not a classical performance, it's just folk music. But he weaves it into something far grander. And I think it's totally fine to if that distinction is very clear to me too. Like you can take that and put it into a piece and then it becomes classical if it's woven into some tapestry.
Mm. So are you guys okay about tweeting that thong song is not classical music?
I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, you willing to? Okay, I'll wait for that. I want to see that tweet. That's a great quote. Thong song is not classical music. Great. So we have a some food for for our discussion. Roger Scruton and David Matthews would often ponder the puzzle that has emerged from your fascinating comments. If it is true that tonality is connected internally to emotion, and if serious music has metaphysical reference, then it ought not to be possible for classical music to encounter the problems that have been referred to, such as old tropes, kitsch, pastiche. This suggests that there could not be an internal crisis in the art, and that only external cultural factors can obscure the value of the tradition or make it seem as if the tradition itself is a problem. So that was a characterization of Roger Scruton's view. But it's a little, would you like me to restate that? This is
Yeah.
if it's true that tonality is connected internally to emotion, that this is in our human nature. Tonality is in our human nature to feel pulled, either pulled or not pulled. Either the harmony is working or it doesn't work in a way that works on our emotions. And this serious music has a metaphysical reference. That's just something. Um, it's a vantage point into another world. um, then it ought not to be possible for classical music to encounter the problems that we were talking about, kitsch and things like that.
Okay, I think I'm following. I would say that whenever you're speaking of tonality, you're primarily speaking of pitch and rhythm. And this is where we believe that the hierarchies have gotten out of order.
Okay,
Because
good. Coming back to that.
whenever you put in the 20th century, they put timbre in many cases way above pitch relations in terms of the hierarchies. And so that's why it goes off the rails, is because there's a distortion of the hierarchy.
I've experienced that many times, and suddenly we're just making a bunch of noise rather than, some scrapey sound being a color over a harmonic event.
Right. Yes. And that, yes, right.
Yeah, Corigliano has in his Circus Maximus has a shotgun go off in the middle of the concert hall. It is in a concert hall. You have no idea how loud a shotgun is. It's unreal. But it's just like stabbed through the heart for everyone because it's just it's so loud and Corigliano is a composer who can truly write music, but he starts to cross over the threshold into these effects, and then I think in my opinion, I think he loses the audiences, and it's for that reason Corigliano has not caught on as a composer.
You need shotgun consordino, if you're gonna.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, that stuff. I liked his work on the red violin and that sort of bit, and I think that he's got a lot of nice music. I think that with a lot of modern composition that some composers need to ditch. Not like I'm one to just tell Juilliard professors what they should and shouldn't be doing, but I think that there's a lot of social pressure. I think that in academia, there's a lot of historicism that music is going through this progression, is getting more and more dissonant and more accepting of dissonance. But we have done 70 years of the dissonance thing, or I've even seen tonal composers where they'll make something real beautiful and they'll have a triad, and then they'll just all of a sudden layer in this really nasty chord and then move on from it. And I don't understand the purpose of the form or the form of that. I'm not sure what it evokes. It's jarring, and I like surprise, and I like whenever things aren't expected. But sometimes you need to set up a bunch of expectations, and then you need to meet those expectations. It can't always constantly be left turns, uh, jolting the audience out of their focus.
So the sense of being able to anticipate what's happening, because like it's also, again, back to a movie. With movies you can be pulled into the. It's okay to have these incredible turns of the story where it surprises you, but you still want to be you want to know what's going on.
Well, it's like Bernard Herrmann's Psycho score starts very
Yeah,
dissonant, and then it doesn't start that way. I mean, in the murders, the shower scene, that you get this sort of like shrieking violence, but then
yeah.
after that, you get something. He has this like really nice melody also that accompanies. Like Psycho has a really nice melody too, and it the
Yeah.
people. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
just that
Oh,
it has a lot of great music and not to just like I don't want it to come across maybe that I don't want to speak for Steven, but it's not like we're going to trash everything avant-garde ever achieved. Like there are certain situations where I think it was the perfect choice, like Penderecki's Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima. For people
yeah.
who know that piece or not, it's very, very tough to listen to, but the
Yeah.
subject matter matches what's being
Yeah.
written. And
Correlates.
I
Yeah.
think in a horror like what the 20th century did to people, I do understand the argument that's a lot of people will say that because of what happened in the 20th century that music needs to confront that.
Life,
However, I'm
life is
adding a
ugly. Life
I'm
is
adding
ugly.
a yeah,
Therefore, art should
yeah.
be ugly. That.
However, I add the caveat that says not just only that. You know, you can't come out of like a tragedy like the Second World War and just write horrendous music forever. I mean, the people who came out of the plague and started the Renaissance, the people who made it through the 30 Years' War in Germany, that gave us Buxtehude and Bach. You know, and the 30 Years' War, for example, for the people who don't know, it's like 25% of Germany died, the population. So it's
Yeah.
like not even comparable to, I mean, World War II was its own thing, but not even like more Germans in percentage to how many were alive back then died during that war. And yet the answer to that wasn't, oh, we have to confront beauty and write, horrendous music. And even in the 20th century, with that, where that argument is so parroted in the West, you have the Soviet composers, and the Soviets suffered probably the most. And they continued tonality well into the early 70s with composers, with Shostakovich famously. So
Well,
it's
you
it's a, it's a choice at the end of the day. It's not that it has to be this way. And I
you
think
rem
actually the response to horrible things, it's better remedied with beauty.
Yes. Um, right. Ultimately, we want to get there. For our audience, a really great book is by Jeremy Eichler, a recent book called Time's Echo: Music, Memory, and the Second World War. I think that's where we are in our conversation. If you're interested in understanding this period of music where we were, what is the way for music to respond with integrity to the horrors of two world wars. And that was, have these different composers who had, you know incredible experiences in relation to the war, and how they responded with incredible art. um, I did want to we do have another question coming from the audience. I want to talk about how do we fund new music. Have you given much thought to the patronage and the role of money, particularly the shift from aristocratic patronage to state patronage and America's funding model, which is, where we have private funding, of commissioning and whatnot. Um, uh, this question wants to know the they're saying that the European avant-garde was seeking to neutralize radical leftism in the wake of the Cold War. Whereas, um, interesting way of putting things, I would characterize the European avant-garde as radical leftism in the wake of the Cold War rather than neutralizing it. So yeah, there's a couple ways of looking at
No,
what.
neutralizing communism, that I would actually agree with. That was
Okay.
actually there's a lot of evidence basically that like the CIA and their financing of
Oh,
arts
I
went through
see.
the what was it, the Council for Cultural Freedom, which I think in the late 60s was revealed to be a CIA front that
Yeah.
had like a network of artists that they were funding in Europe and also composers. Uh, I think one of the, I'm blanking on his name right now, but one of their like people who was in on all of this was a composer. Even like the Darmstadt School, the first
Yeah.
like summer courses of the Darmstadt School, for people who don't know, it's like the sort of the mecca of avant-garde music in Europe, Darmstadt. That was started by military intelligence of the US after the war. And so the whole like goal was the anti-communist left. So
Yeah.
it was to subdue, it was to show um, our music in the West allows basically this total freedom of music. Whereas we have this freedom where music is like objective, subjective, sorry.
Subject. Yeah.
And the Soviets, they have this socialist realism and Pravda that critiques Shostakovich via Stalin if he writes an opera that's a little bit off, like Lady Macbeth famously. But yeah, so that's basically so yeah, I would agree with that point. It's actually probably true for the most part.
Okay, so the question is, how are we to fund new music? I'll be provocative and say, I think there's a problem with paying composers for something that we haven't heard yet. And I understand composers need to eat, but I would rather hear what the piece is first before I decide if I want to purchase it. Because what's happening quite a bit is once the money is, once the composers have been paid to write a new piece, they just write whatever they want, and then it could be a real bomb. Not that they wanted to write a bomb, but they wanted total freedom to what you're talking. They wanted to just write something, and they feel that it's their prerogative to, it's not their responsibility to make people happy, or to even that the commissioning body would even make money from selling tickets or having a box office success. Their role is just to write within their own little in their own world what they want to write, and they have a certain entitlement to be paid for that.
Yeah, that's it's fraught with risk, of course, but that's also the nature of the arts anyway. I mean, if every single benefactor loved every single, I mean, they didn't love every single thing that was ever produced. I mean, even Winston Churchill, there's a famous scene in The Crown where he burns the portrait that was given to him, and by some artist that apparently depicted him in a very real and artistic way that was nice. But I understand, I understand the question. That I think the primary solution is that you need organizations like this one, like Roger Scruton Legacy Foundation, to be a conduit between benefactors and artists. Because you have credentialing, you have the connections being made, but also there's some oversight that can take place, because
Mhm.
they're going to bring benefactors, composers with sort of existing track records. And I don't want to get into like, well, how do you make it as a composer with a track record? For the existing ones that are doing the type of music, like Henry and I, and some of our friends, we're doing this type of music, and you like like the credentialing that comes to us is like, hey, if you give money to he and I to write a symphony, a string quartet, a piano sonata, whatever it is, those dollars are not going to be wasted, because we have track records and we're really, really serious about doing good work. I'm not doing this with the sole reason just to make a living. If I just wanted to make a living, I would have been a lawyer like the rest of my family, or gone into politics or something, right? Like, I'm doing this because I have a passion for it. And even if the commission is a meager sum and it's paid up front, you're going to get way more value out of it down the road. Am I never going to write a stinker? I mean, look, you know, like I can't wrap my head around how Beethoven wrote his Seventh Symphony, which is one of my favorite, and then the ninth, two symphonies later, and then the eighth in the middle. Maybe this is a controversial opinion. Is just I can't stand the thing. Like how did he have such brilliance, and then in between that, just like totally mess it up?
Well, I mean, Wellington's victory is also like,
Those are the biggest trumpet parts in all of his
yeah.
work. Wellington's Victory is a masterpiece. And I
Exactly.
invite our audience to go on YouTube, listen to Beethoven, Wellington's Victory, and tell me I'm wrong. So here's a question. Let's talk about AI, because everyone's afraid for their jobs with AI on the horizon, and it's writers. I mean, it's this thing that's become part of our lives, that AI is doing people's jobs for them. Kids in universities are beside themselves, because how are they going to police kids in university, or or elementary school, not asking ChatGPT to do their homework for them? I mean, this is really a problem. But the question is, as stated, is how can emerging composers prepare for an industry where AI generative music is becoming a norm? Is it becoming a norm? AI generative music?
It will. I think
It
it
will. Okay,
definitely
well,
will. It
how are you
will, especially.
how are you going to prepare then?
Well, I'll just prepare it with a quote my teacher told me. It's something my teacher told me like 15 years ago. He said, in the coming decades, the master craftsmen will be worth their weight in gold. So if you're just producing, you know, mediocre tracks for, commercial stuff, like easy. I think Steven mentioned this on I don't want to take what he was going to say, but there was basically that, like, people who do like reality shows and stuff, is what he said, that they would take basically their that it would take their jobs away. But
Yeah.
people like Steven and I, who spent time learning counterpoint, voice leading, theory, going through the masters, developing our own sound, I have zero fear of AI. Um,
Okay. Yeah. So
because
the best of the best are still going to prevail over AI,
yeah,
but it
and it's
might
also gonna,
it might take out the middle.
and if I may say, it's gonna cause also chaos for studio musicians.
Uh,
um, because AI is going to get very good at producing like samples. So somebody sends in a trumpet part. Unfortunately, for people who play trumpet as like their gig, for AI is going to get to the point where it will be very indistinguishable. I've already heard like flute samples that I would not be able to tell you if that was real
yeah,
or AI.
absolutely.
So that's
By the
going to
way,
be a problem,
you mentioned
definitely.
the soundtrack to Psycho. Busta Rhymes took some clips out of Psycho for one of his remixes some years ago. Do you remember that? Busta Rhymes with Psycho in it.
I believe it.
Uh,
Gladly.
it just popped up. So I wanted to get into your own personal spiritual lives. Do you believe in divine inspiration for your own music to revive classical music? In the old model, that we were inspired, meaning that we would breathe in um, some this inspiration from a muse, from something beyond this material world, and and you'd see these old engravings of a poet or someone sort of receiving something from the beyond. um, and this person also, our person making this question, reminds us that the best classical composers were all people of faith. So there was a strong, these were not classical music as we know it did not come out of a secular culture, but a religious culture.
Absolutely. If I mean, God being the source of all things, it has to originate there. And so, but it's your comportment with inspiration, right? The process of composition, my view, is not sort of this Promethean spirit that you're creating all of these things and you're in complete control. To me, it's a surrendering of the process, almost like a meditation, and you as a vessel or an antenna to receive that inspiration. Whenever you try to force something in the arts, and I believe this is probably the same with performance as well. We all know the best performances are sort of where you lose yourself while you're playing. You have no idea what you just did. You're told, like if you're a world class, best in the world guy like Andy Balio playing something on Bach on the trumpet, I swear, everybody, the trumpet, while he's playing, the trumpet disappears. And it's just this beautiful singing music that comes through. And it's like he's an entity. He's not even like human anymore whenever you listen to it. It's so beautiful. And this is what happens. I think maybe this is sort of a weird Heideggerian formulation that it's, the trumpet's there. I can see it. No, it's, you don't even notice that it's there whenever. Anyway, the compositional process of inspiration is the exact same thing. This is why composers would go on long walks and just look at nature, and then boom, an idea springs forth. Henry's got a great story about one of my favorite pieces he's done. It just came to him on a walk, right?
Well, Mahler really needed those walks in nature. He was so dependent on his walks, and his music changed by I think it was by the time he got to the Ninth Symphony, and he was in bedridden, and then suddenly he missed that communion with nature so much. But Henry, tell us the story. I'm intrigued.
Well, I was just taking a walk in sort of the Vienna woods, and it was there's this, I think it's translated to wild garlic. It's this type of like leaf that you can pick in the woods, and you can cut it and put in ravioli, whatever. But the whole like forest floor is full of them, and they all bloom at once. So it just happened to be while I was walking, the whole forest floor was just white with these flowers, and it's like, I don't. People who take LSD forget about that. This was crazy. It's like you can't get better than that. And so I was walking through that, and I just spent, I don't know, like 4 or 5 hours, because I know most of the trails in the Vienna woods by heart at this point. And I got home, and I wrote the second movement to one of my pieces in like 3 days. It just came out while I labored through the other movements that took months sometimes. So that's like the ideal situation, and that's from what the feedback I've gotten, everybody's favorite movement from that piece. So that's how basically it should happen. It should be like, you don't even like, sometimes you listen to a piece that you've written and you just have no idea how you wrote it, which is, I think, a testament to that process. It's like, I know when I wrote something, like I know the stuff that sounds like, oh, I sat and wrote that. It sounds like it's been labored over, yuck. Most of those things get thrown in the trash. Sometimes you don't have time, but there's a difference. There's the stuff that just seems the flow state, basically.
Yeah, so are there things that you guys do in order to set the stage for your best work, so that inspiration can come from beyond yourself, maybe enter into the flow state, or to sort of lose yourself to do what hopefully would be better work than what you could do on your simply through sheer willpower?
Menial tasks are great. You could be washing dishes, you could be at the gym, you could be, it happened in the shower, dusting. I think menial tasks are great because you can lose yourself, not listening to a podcast even, although sometimes, but whenever you're physically occupied with something else, there's something about that physical activity. This is why I think walking is so good, or just observing nature. I feel like it's not like I don't pop open the Bible and start reading verses, and then all of a sudden, the Psalms come down and I'm totally, whatever it is. It's if I'm doing something that's completely unrelated to anything that I don't have to actively think about, that I can do by rote memory. Those are the best times for me. And so I make sure in the day that I have, it might look like I'm staring out the window for a second, but for whatever reason, all of a sudden something pops up. I just have to be in that position where I'm not distracted by the phone. You can't be doom scrolling. That's not good. I never get ideas whenever I'm doom scrolling and reading the news, right? So it's putting some of those things down, having some quiet or some noise. It could be watching traffic.
Mm, beautiful.
I mean,
Oh,
there's the aspect of there's also the issue that this leads to with some composers with substance abuse, unfortunately, who will abuse alcohol, or I mean, like most of the composers were chain smokers up until like the mid 20th century. I mean, all of them's got cigarettes. There's pictures of I mean, Bach wrote a whole cantata about smoking, pipe smoking. So you know, so that's something that's like when they can't get it from the source, that's an honest thing that happens with composers. They'll resort to drinking or smoking or something even worse than
yeah,
that.
that's a bad case scenario because they
Yeah,
were
that's a bad
they,
consider.
they're constantly chasing that inspiration they once had, but it gets further and further away because of the substance abuse. It actually pushes their mind into a worse and worse, less creative state.
And I'll
So
say abuse because I have written some many amazing things after 2 glasses of wine. Just
Yeah,
because
definitely,
sometimes
definitely.
it
Yeah,
shuts down the judgment side of your brain. And so you can just flow better because you won't judge your work, because you might get a good idea that's great and then you're like, well, this might not work or whatever. You won't do that as much, which is really critical in the creative process.
well, it's
yeah.
so
By all
funny.
accounts, yeah, yeah.
So funny you should mention that. I was just walking around in Prague, which was Sir Roger Scruton's old stomping grounds, and there was a wine shop, and they had a Roger Scruton quote, and I'll read it to you. It said, Roger writes, "Wine drunk in the right frame of mind is definitely good for the soul." And
T- totally
yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So I know that he would drink wine and do his writing, so there's a moderation. It's just like riding that edge, not getting hammered, but getting loosened up. Yeah. And treating, even though he said that wine could not be an aesthetic object, I know that wine was very central for him as part of the aesthetic contemplation process. So wine was part of an aesthetic experience for him, even though it was not an aesthetic object.
Interesting.
Um, so someone asks, the attention span of a modern adult is getting dramatically shorter with the turn of every decade. Would it be advisable for modern composers to write much shorter pieces? Yeah, so they go on to say, I sometimes imagine the variations and Rachmaninoff's variations with, I think the themes of Paganini, I think they mean, are rearranged for various instrumental combinations, including some ethics. Is there a Rachmaninoff variations on theme of Corelli?
Yes.
Oh, there is. Okay, I didn't know about that. Oh, cool. I want to hear this thing. Okay, excuse me.
It's really good. It's really good.
I
Highly
stand
recommended.
corrected. I love discovering something new. Um, can such an idea revitalize interest in art music if we start going to shorter works, shorter form, or does that limit your possibilities, for development?
Yeah, I mean, people will still tune in to a 3 hour Joe Rogan podcast and listen to the whole thing. And so it's really funny because it's either like 3 hours of attention, which is, I don't know, a long Mahler symphony, or
Not
something,
even
or
beyond beyond the Mahler symphony.
or it's you only get them for 6 seconds on a TikTok video.
Yeah,
So
no, you want the long form. No, so are you saying that Joe Rogan is the Wagner of podcasting?
sure, he needs an editor sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, right, exactly. Well, certainly intermissions.
Right.
Everything isn't everything though in context though, because it's not like if I hear this argument a lot, but I think it's not really entirely valid. Um, like if you even like let's take like 60s rock songs. A lot of them are only like 2 minutes long. But then if you
Okay.
get to like if you get to like the 90s, then you've got like 8 minute like Radiohead songs or something. So even like in that world where you'd think that it would get shorter and shorter and shorter as attention spans get shorter, it's not necessarily the case always. And I think everything is in context. Somebody sits in a concert hall, you've already won them. First of all, they're sitting there. They are there for the 30-minute experience of music. And if you're writing like multi-movement pieces, one of your pieces might like one of those movements might be 2 minutes and might work online. But I just think it isn't true, as Stephen said, about people sit and listen to 3 hour podcasts.
Yeah, they'll sit
Yeah.
through something if they want to sit. They're in.
Yeah, and
I agree with that. Yeah,
if you're trying to push your new classical composition on Instagram and TikTok, that's probably the wrong place.
right. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, I wanted to, if we wanted to hear your music, or if our audience would like to hear your music, hear what we're talking about here, how can they hear you guys? What are the best ways for them to listen to your compositions? Henry?
You can, I've got 3 albums on Spotify you can listen to for the people who use Spotify, even though
Just look up your
Spotify is
name, Henry Carey.
Yeah, just look up my name, and otherwise on my channel, Musica Universalis,
Yeah, it's a great YouTube channel.
MUSICA, yeah, yeah, Universalis. And there's a tab on my channel that's just called like compositions, where
Okay.
there's some like live performances of my pieces. That's where you can hear my music.
Yeah, because we're really getting, now that we've gotten to know you, of course, now we all want to hear your music, to know your musical soul. And Stephen, how can people hear your music? Point us in a good direction?
Sure. Mine's on Apple Music as well. If you just search my name. But also, I would encourage people to go to the X platform, Elon Musk's X, formerly Twitter, because I'm doing live composition almost every week. I do another video of me writing a new symphony for the America semi-quincentennial, which is 250 years of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I do have musical examples of that up there. I had our buddy Zachary Whitney play the trombone solo excerpt that the first movement Allegro opens up with. And you get to see the whole process unfold and listen to it as I'm working through. It's interesting, and the feedback has been very, very good. And like you said in the intro, I mean, I've had over 2 million views of people that have tuned into it. So check, it's just my name at X.
That's incredible amount of views. You're approaching pop music levels at that point. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's incredible, you guys. Well, it's been such a pleasure spending time with you, the next generation of great composers. You really have your heads in the right places. So many composers who came before you in the late 20th century were they had the burden of what I would say some very disadvantageous ideas, very debilitating ideas that I think made it impossible for them to simply write from the heart to other people's hearts. And I know that you have at the front of your processes to truly move other human beings. So I'm excited to watch your careers over the coming decades.